All right. Good morning and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Ashley Watts. I am a Texas Racial Equity Collaborative, or TREC, doctoral fellow here at Children at Risk, and I'm so excited to get this 2024 Equity Summit started. For those of you who are new, Children at Risk is a Texas nonpartisan research and advocacy nonprofit dedicated to addressing the root causes of child poverty and inequities. Our mission here is to serve as a catalyst for change, to improve the quality of life for children through strategic research, public policy analysis, education, collaboration, and advocacy. This event is hosted in partnership with our Texas Family Leadership Council, a collaborative of family-serving organizations across the state of Texas. And you can view the agenda for today's program and get to know our featured experts using the links that are dropped in the chat. If you have any questions, please submit those for our speakers using our Q&A function. Feedback on these events is critical to our ability to continue providing these programs for free. It would be really appreciated if everyone could complete a survey that we send out at the end of this event. And after the event, all registrants will receive the slide deck and any resources that are going to be shared throughout the duration of this event, as well as the link to watch the recording. I would like to provide a special thank you to HEB for sponsoring the Texas Family Leadership Council and our learning events. Major thank you to our partners, Early Learning Alliance, United Way of Tarrant County, I Am Schools, and Evident Change.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. My name is Marisol Chrisman. I am the director for the Texas Family Leadership Council. I am with Children at Risk, and I'm very excited about today's summit. And thank you all again for joining us. I will be going through some slides on data that we have received from our CSME team, and we're very grateful for them. So we'll go ahead and get started. I don't want to take time from our speakers and panelists today. We'll start with access to basic needs. 1 in 5 Texas children experiences hunger. Children who lack access to enough food during their first 3 years of life face disadvantages, including a higher chance of health concerns. In later years, children face a higher risk of falling behind in school and experiencing social and behavioral challenges. Children experiencing food insecurity may be distracted by hunger or trouble focusing on classwork and essential learning. More than 18% of Latino children are at risk of hunger compared to 12% of white, non-Hispanic children. Black households face hunger at a rate more than twice that of white, non-Hispanic households. And getting enough to eat is a consistent struggle for 1 in 4 Black children. Rural Texans are also disproportionately affected. The featured table displays the hunger rates in selected Texas counties by race and/or ethnicity. Hunger rates are disproportionately higher amongst Black and Hispanic communities in these counties and across the state. In Harris County, for example, 25% of children living in hunger are Black, while 18% are Hispanic and only 7% are white. Still with basic needs, we see that between 2019 and 2020, there was a significant surge in housing insecurity, particularly affecting Black and Hispanic households with children. Black households saw a staggering 16% increase in housing insecurity, while Hispanic households experienced a nearly 9% rise. Contrastingly, the rate of housing insecurity among white households has remained steady at 18% since 2018. In the 2018-2019 school year, data from the U.S. Department of Education revealed that approximately 114,055 public school students in Texas grappled with homelessness at some point during the year. Accurately capturing the number of children experiencing homelessness presents a challenge due to difficulties in locating and counting individuals in this situation. The challenges in obtaining these numbers have been worsened by the impact of COVID-19. When we look at access to good health, Originally scheduled to be released in September 2021, the Texas Maternal Health Report was delayed for over a year. The delay not only prolonged health inequities among minority communities, but also contributed to ongoing distress in healthcare systems. Insufficient data and resources prevent stakeholders from making informed decisions, which in turn threatens the health of marginalized families. Despite 5 years since the formation of the Maternal Mortality and Morbidity Review Committee in Texas, we continue to witness not only a rise in the overall maternal mortality rate, but also larger disparities along racial and ethnic lines. Non-Hispanic Black families in Texas have the highest maternal mortality rate in the state of Texas, with rates increasing 10% since 2014. We see a 25% increase in MMR among the Hispanic population, while the non-Hispanic white population saw no change. Black and brown families saw a disproportionate increase in severe maternal morbidity since the state began their efforts to decrease the MMR. Immigrant communities in Texas, comprising 17% of the population, or 5 million people, encounter barriers such as limited access to affordable health care, language obstacles, misinformation, and medical mistrust, placing them at risk of not receiving vital pregnancy information. Moreover, over 850,000 children have undocumented parents, and approximately 1.2 million have a legal permanent resident parent. However, current federal law mandates citizenship or 5 years of permanent residency for Medicaid eligibility, denying many eligible immigrant children and families access to necessary care. The maternal mortality rate is a symptom of the larger systemic racism and biases rooted in our society, which in turn impact people's health outcomes. According to the World Health Organization, most maternal deaths occur in low and lower middle income counties due to lack of resources, yet there is evidence that no matter the socioeconomic status of Black women, they are at greater risk of poor maternal health outcomes. In addition to coping with problems, as we continue with access to good health, in addition to coping with problems like food insecurity and limited access to healthcare, pandemic and post-pandemic issues add to the stress inflicted on Texas youth. More than 500,000 Texas children were diagnosed with anxiety or depression in 2020, an increase of 23% from 2016. Nearly 4 in 5 Latino youth suffer at least one traumatic experience like poverty or abuse. The number of people looking for help has also increased, while simultaneously the mental health workforce has decreased, resulting in a shortage of qualified mental health professionals. Meanwhile, mental health services still lack adequate insurance coverage, contributing to the decline in mental well-being among children and adolescents in Texas. According to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, 65% of Texas youth with depression did not receive any care, ranking Texas 47 out of 51 states. When we look at access to quality education, 62% of students attending Texas public schools are living in economically disadvantaged circumstances. Over 100,000 more children were affected by poverty than the previous school year. Many of these students face unique challenges and require additional assistance to succeed academically. Allocating more funds to schools in low-income areas, expanding access to early childhood education, and implementing targeted interventions for students facing challenges are key steps to tackle this issue. 18% of students in Texas public schools are emergent bilingual English language learners, facing unique challenges as they navigate the education system. It is important for educators to provide support and resources to ensure that these students have equal opportunities to succeed academically. By embracing and celebrating linguistic and cultural diversity, Texas public schools can create inclusive learning environments that benefit all students. The third grade reading star serves as a critical milestone as it marks the transition from learning to read to reading to learn. Proficiency in third grade reading is a strong predictor of future academic success as it reflects a foundational understanding of essential literacy skills. Mastering reading at this stage is pivotal for comprehension across all subjects and lays the groundwork for continued learning. Monitoring third grade reading star outcomes allows educators and policymakers to identify and address potential literacy challenges early, ensuring that students build the necessary skills for lifelong learning and academic achievement. Similarly, the 8th grade math star holds significant importance in assessing a student's mathematical proficiency as they approach high school. Success at this stage is a strong predictor of future success in advanced math courses and STEM-related fields. By monitoring 8th grade math star outcomes, educators and policymakers gain insights into students' mathematical readiness, allowing for targeted interventions and support to ensure they are well equipped for the challenges of high school and beyond. For access to fair justice. The importance of racial diversity in the teacher workforce is exemplified through stark racial disparities in school discipline. Several studies have indicated that when students have a teacher of the same race, racial disparities in discipline become smaller. However, racial disparities remain in the disciplinary actions taken against Texas students. These disparities not only point to unfair and biased action against marginalized students, but have consequences in students' overall academic performance and outcomes. Black students in Texas accounted for 32% of all out-of-school suspensions in the 2021-2022 school year, despite making up only 13% of the student population. In the same year, white students accounted for 14% of all out-of-school suspensions, while composing 26% of the student population. 79% of all suspended students were economically disadvantaged. Thank you. And those are our highlights of the Equity Summit.
Thank you so much, Marisol, for highlighting those key data pieces. And I'm now going to introduce our first panel, which is Unveiling the Inequities, which navigating health, justice, education, and basic needs disparities. Today, we embark on a journey of discovery and dialogue as we delve into the intricate layers of inequity that permeate our society. Our first panel, will you please join us?
Thank you, Ashley, and good morning, everyone. My name is Viridiana Carrizales. I'm the co-founder and CEO of M-Schools. We're a nonprofit organization that supports our undocumented and immigrant students in our K-12 schools. And it's truly an honor to be moderating this panel and starting the first session of this 2024 Equity Summit. I have the pleasure of engaging in conversations with some powerful panelists this morning. So Veronica Alvarez is the Director of Transformation for Dallas Truth Racial Healing and Transformation, or TRHT. Reverend Russell Hall, who is the Director of Youth Homeless Services in Houston Revision, and Yvette Lano, who is the founder and Director of Beauty's Community Garden. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to be in this panel in this critical conversation around the inequities that exist within the health, justice, and education system. So I appreciate you all for being here this morning. And I'll start by asking you, Veronica, the first question. And if you, along with others, if you can share just a little bit about yourself and the organization that you're leading as you're responding to the question, that will be super helpful. But my question to you is, in the context of health disparities, what factors contribute to inequities?
Thank you. Thank you for introducing me. I'm Veronica Alvarez, and I'm the Director of Transformation at Dallas TRHT. So what I do is that I provide support to partner organizations on their journey towards racial equity and towards creating equitable policies and practices within their scope of work. And I also manage our programmatic evaluations. So I do want to start off with what we know before we get into the contributing factors and the question that you just asked. So what we know is that we do live and function within a society that works according to a racial hierarchy. What that means is that it's inherently racist, and that racial injustice and health equity require action at a structural level. And we acknowledge that our neighborhoods and communities are and have been purposely racially segregated, and this has impacted health outcomes for BIPOC communities. So there's a lot of factors that we can say contribute to health disparities, but what I wanted to focus on were three that I have, been actively, working on, in the past and now. And the ones that I want to focus on are lack of access to quality prenatal and postpartum care, as well as pediatric care to a certain extent, because I don't want to get too much into the weeds or too much into the details of everything, just due to lack of time. So I also want to discuss that another factor is food apartheids. And then the final factor that I would like to discuss is inadequate living conditions, for BIPOC communities of color, especially when it comes to those living in low-income housing. So would you like for me to go into more detail as far as that?
I think this next question might probably prompt you to go more into detail, but thank you for sharing those three. I think focusing on those will be critical. So what are the strategies that TRHT employed to unveil and communicate those health disparities with the community? Maybe that will be great for you to go more in depth into those three factors that you mentioned.
Okay, so we have different programmatic objectives, one of those being our Racial Equity Now cohort. Within this cohort, we provide racial equity training, we provide education on racial healing, racial justice. And what we do is we provide organizations with what they need to create equitable policies and practices within their organizations, as I mentioned. So currently, this past year, we graduated and 11 organizations within Dallas. And all together with the cohort in general for the 4 years that it has existed within Dallas, we have worked with 8 orgs that are directly related to the health field. So what they're doing is they're creating policies within themselves or practices, as I mentioned, that can encompass maybe hiring practices, how, they provide services to the community. So that's one example.
Thank you for highlighting that. And I think what you mentioned on, because these are systemic issues, like the structural change and approaching it from that angle is really the way for us to make that meaningful change and move to more equitable practices and policies for our communities. So appreciate you sharing that on the health sector and those disparities that impact our community, especially our communities of color. So for this next question, I'll go to you, Reverend Russell Hall. If you can share what inspired you to become involved in youth homeless services and how has your perspective evolved over time?
So my name is Russell Hall. I am the Director of Youth Homeless Services here at Houston Revision. I have spent more than 20 years in pastoral ministry. I am a recovering addict and alcoholic, and I have lived experience in the homeless arena. So even though my lived experience is a little over 3 decades ago, it had a major impact on wanting to help folks who just don't have the resources at hand to be able to make a life-changing move from homelessness to sustainability. Through the course of pastoring both rural and urban churches over the last 2 decades before I went to the nonprofit sector, it was regular that we would see homelessness. And I believe it was Marisol that said something earlier that really struck a chord. I'm not sure the numbers that we have are accurate because they're really hard to locate. We have families that are living in their vehicles that are still taking their kids to school, and then they're coming back and parking in the school parking lots at night and going to the Y for showers. We have young people that are couch surfing because they have nowhere else to go. And there's a whole element of youth homelessness now that is really hard to identify because we always picture this homeless individual that is on the streets or that is, it just looks very different today. And it makes it very challenging to locate. But going back to my own situation, the help that I received, I just wanted to be a part of it long term of trying to restructure the resources that were available to young people so that they might be able to have an option other than homelessness.
Thank you for sharing that. I do believe that those who are directly impacted by injustices, inequities are best positioned to create the solutions and create impact. So I appreciate you and the ways that you're uplifting that lived experience to create change in your own community. If you can also share on how do you believe systemic issues contribute to youth homelessness? And what strategies do you believe are effective in addressing these root causes?
So I think this is really, I mean, we could probably speak 8 hours on this topic alone. It's really a challenge to put it all in a nutshell. But I think there are a variety of things that impact both homelessness and health and food disparity. Part of that is the disparity in people of color being able to make a livable wage. And that's just the flat out God's honest truth. There is a huge disparity. If you go to work at McDonald's and you're making $11 an hour, you will never ever be able to afford your own apartment. The rental rate that HUD provides assistance up for is like $1,014 for a one bedroom, and at $11 an hour, you cannot afford your insurance, your phone, your car, your apartment, your utilities, etc. And so, structurally, we really need a livable wage to be able to begin to change the tide, if you will, on youth homelessness. Um, I think that there are a lack of, I mean, all the disparities that were in the first slides are all part of that. So, what we do is we do collaborative community work where we partner with agencies that can provide healthcare for those that don't have it, that can help with free trainings to increase the employability. So we work with programs locally that will do training for people to get their CDL, or will do training for people to get their CNA certifications so that they can actually get into fields that have a livable wage. And, on the flip side, we advocate through different channels for folks to actually change the minimum wage, to raise the amount of pay for the jobs that are available, that are sometimes the easiest to get into, just because I think that is structurally necessary. The other thing, I think, component that would be hugely helpful, at least in our area, and I might speak to the Dallas area only because I spend a good amount of time there with friends, is that in my experience, both metropolitan areas in Texas really struggle with having affordable housing. So the housing market, there's a huge disparity. You have there's either $35,000 almost not livable type of property, and there's a $300,000 livable property, but there's nothing in between. And so to have affordable housing and to be intentional structurally with city planning and with all the agencies that would be involved in that, to actually provide apartments and homes that would be reasonably affordable with a livable wage, would be another structural way to help improve that. Those are huge, massive beasts to attack. In the meantime, we come alongside folks with wraparound services. We provide rental assistance. We put up deposits for folks so that they can get into their first apartment. We help folks that have had past evictions. We work with their budgets. I mean, we do a whole host of social services to try to help people overcome the obstacles that are in front of them.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'll go back. I'll go to you, Yvette Leno, but I'm already making some connections between what you share, Veronica, on the living conditions being one of the factors, and the inequities that our community are experiencing, and that what you share, Russell, on the living wage and affordable housing. So I know that these are, some of the inequities that go across the different sectors of work that we do. So thank you for highlighting that. So Yvette Leno, thank you for joining us. I have a question for you. And when it comes to addressing basic needs disparities, what role can community-driven initiatives play in ensuring that everyone has access to fundamental resources such as nourishing food? And how can we empower communities to be active participants in the process?
Well, at Beauty's Community Garden, I say that our garden is a garden by the people and for the people. When we started Beauty's Community Garden, we called the community members together so that they can have a say-so in how that a garden should look, or if we should even have a garden, and what things are important to them. And so this is how we start to empower people. And as a result, we have great response from the community. When we started, they let us know how important our history is to them. Because we serve in Independence Heights, which is the first African-American municipality established in Texas. So that is very important to them that we bring out our history. As a result of their feedback, we take opportunities to celebrate cultural holidays and cultural times that we can bring out the history of Independence Heights and other cultures. We also heard from them that they would like community events to recultivate that sense of community. And so we do those things in the garden too. While the garden all by itself belongs to a sense of community, just growing things together. Because we do grow in a community sense of the word. We don't sell plots or rent plots. We do this in a community type way. Does that help?
Yes, it does. By and for the community. There's
Yeah.
power in that. So thank you for sharing it, sharing that. And so what inspired the establishment of the community garden and how has it evolved over time?
Okay.
I think this goes back to the history that you mentioned of like how important knowing the history, it is to the community. So if you can uplift more on that end.
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. Back in 1991, I was making a transition from our homestead in Independence Heights, where the garden is actually located. And I had plans for that particular home site. And there was a fire, unfortunately, and it destroyed our home. So while seeking what to do, I came into the knowledge of community gardening. And that is how that idea came about. And of course, as I said, we went to the community for their feedback. We started out with nothing, just absolutely nothing. This was when we say grassroots, this was as grassroots as you could get. So, but we were fortunate that people saw the vision. They wanted to be connected with what we did. And for almost 11 years, we continued to operate just with total volunteerism alone. And we have been able to accomplish some wonderful things just with those volunteers. But recently, about a year ago, we attracted the eyes of someone, or well, I won't say someone, but it was a organization that wanted to give us a year of investment so that we could build stronger structure and serve the community in a better way. And because of that, we have seen our production more than double just in the short amount of time that we have had this. We've been able to attract more, to expand our collaborative efforts with partners in our community. And so I just can't imagine what it would have been like had we had this help early on, but we are so grateful to have had it now and to be able to serve our community in a better fashion, because we believe that everyone should have the dignity of eating well. And I want to just say that when I first went into Whole Foods, I said, wow, this is how people live that can really afford this. Not knowing that I was going to one day have the power to help people to afford those same quality of foods that they can get in these major retail chains that grow the kinds of foods that we grow and the kinds of food that they provide in the stores, which are naturally grown without pesticides. So I'm very happy about that.
I got chills. That was powerful. Thank you for sharing that. And I feel the community garden is an example of what it means to have community driven and community centered solutions. especially on an issue like food scarcity. So I appreciate the work that you do. For folks who are listening out there, seeing us, please do submit your questions through the Q&A feature. There's already some questions coming through, so appreciate you sharing that. So Yvette, somebody from the in the summit is asking, how was the organization Community Gardens able to connect with the community and speak with its leaders?
What was the second part of it?
How it was able to connect with the community and speak with the leaders in that community, I guess, as you were first establishing.
Okay. Well, for our community, we start with church because that's the heartbeat really of our community. And so, and then we go to community organizations within the community. And so we went to them and asked to meet with their congregations, and had an audience with community organizations within our community. That's how we started.
Thank you for answering that. And as folks continue to send questions our way, I do want to ask, because I do see the overlap and the intersection of the issues, even if you're all working in different sectors. The main inequities that exist overlap within the different sectors that we're working on with, living wage, living conditions, food access. So can each of you or whoever would like to answer this, can you share some examples of ways that you are collaborating with others in other sectors outside of your own to be able to provide more of that holistic support to the community? Can you provide some examples of some of that overlap that may already be happening in the organizations that you all are serving?
Well, for Beauty's Community Garden, we are collaborating with Prairie View A&M, as well as MD Anderson, in an initiative called Be Well Acres Homes, which is another food desert community near ours that we are supporting with garden education, with our Rooted in Wellness cooking programs. We are also in collaboration with Memorial Hermann, or we've started to build that collaboration with Memorial Hermann, which is a hospital system here in Houston, Texas. They serve a population that have to decide whether they can receive health care or whether they can buy food. And so we are helping support that effort that this particular department in Memorial Hermann is serving these underprivileged people.
Thank you.
We're in Houston
Veronica?
as
Oh, go ahead. Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. We're in Houston as well, and so we've got several partnerships. We work with a local community garden that's right here in our church, that's next to the building that we're in. We work with Legacy to provide healthcare, both mental, dental, vision, and physical health. There's a challenge sometimes with getting the gold card in Harris County and having access to appointments. And so we found that partnerships with Legacy and with Baylor College of Medicine, especially for our folks that are in the second ward, Baylor College of Medicine has got a new clinic that's open. And so we've partnered with them to help make sure that those folks are getting healthcare needs met. And then we partner with ACAM and Next Generation. They're subsets of the Workforce Commission that provide free training. So we've had a number of our clients be able to go get their CNA or their phlebotomy or their welding certifications and move into fields that are livable wages. And then we provide the housing component through funds from private donors and HUD to get folks into stable housing long term. So it's very much a group effort. No one of us could do it alone.
One example of how we're helping or supporting the community is, I mentioned the RE Now cohort, the racial equity cohort. We currently have from our graduating class, Dallas Free Press, and they have their documenters program where they essentially get people from the community to report on what's happening, and they pay them for, the service that they're doing. They attend meetings, they bring back what they've learned, what they know, and part of that has been reporting on food apartheids, where they exist, why they happen, and how to go about remediating the issue if communities are willing, like through incentivizing retailers, discussing zoning laws, unfair segregation practices such as gerrymandering or redlining, discussing food waste, also, as I mentioned, policies and practices, advocating for ongoing, continuation of SNAP and enlarging the program as well, and also building community agency. So talking to communities and having officials come and talk to communities. There's already a lot of mutual aid happening. So talking to the people that are providing mutual aid to see what does the community need. So that's one example of how, I guess you could say, we've partnered with organizations, is that people that have graduated from our cohort are doing the work.
Thank you all for sharing that. I do believe that working across different sectors and through coalitions, it is one of the ways in which we can achieve equity and justice for our communities and our families. So appreciate you sharing that. For this last 4 minutes that we have, can you briefly share, each of you, what are some of the ways in which folks can be involved or learn more about the work that you do? There was one specific question for you, Ms. Leno, on can community gardens, is that at a point where other communities can sort of replicate that model? Can it expand somewhere else? So if you can, each of you again shared, what are some of the ways in which folks who are watching this summit can be involved in the work that you all do?
The question is, can other communities replicate community gardens?
It says, are you at a point where this can be replicated in any community? Can community garden exist in other communities?
It can definitely exist in other communities. As a matter of fact, because of our program, our garden education program, we have community members. Some of them has chosen to start a garden in their own backyard. Some of them have learned how to grow food in containers if they have small spaces. Maybe they're living in an apartment, but they've learned how to grow food and have immediate access right there. So if it can be replicated as small as someone growing food on the ledge of their apartment, it can certainly be replicated in other communities, and quite well. Oh, and how you can be involved. I'm sorry. We have a website. We're also on social media. Our website is beautiesgarden.org. And Beauties has a TYS at the end. I might say that the garden was named for my grandmother, whose name was Beauty. So it's not TIES, it's TYS, beautiesgarden.org. You can visit our website. You can see how to engage with us. Every Saturday, we have volunteer opportunities that you can learn gardening with hands-on training. And then you'll know when we have special events at the garden by tapping into our website and also our social media. We're on Facebook as Beauty's Community Garden on Facebook.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Russell, do you want to go?
Who?
Whoever wants to go next. Veronica,
Okay.
you want to go?
Yeah, so the community can participate in some of our programmatic initiatives, as I mentioned. So we recently held our Health Equity Symposium in October. That was a community-wide event open to everybody. So, check out what we're doing on social media. So within the symposium, we explored national and local approaches to health equity, health justice, and environmental justice. And we also have what's coming up, which is our racial justice community of practice. So we want to take what some of our graduates from RE Now have learned, as well as community partners and members, and take it a little bit further. So we want to continue to learn about racial equity, racial justice, and racial healing. And within these practices, we want everyone to learn more about each other's work, create collaborations, partnerships. We want organizations and people to come together and see where the services that they're providing intersect so that they can provide better quality services to communities, and also create equitable policies and practices, as I mentioned. And we also
And
motivate,
oh,
I'm
sorry.
sorry, and we also motivate organizations to apply for our Community Innovation Lab. So the Community Innovation Lab provides funding and a space for an organization to create a program for the BIPOC communities with the goal of eradicating racism and, and creating an impact by increasing racial equity. So those are 3 examples of how the community can take part. But again, if you're in a nonprofit, please reach out to us.
Thank you,
And of
Veronica.
course, you can go to our website. It's houstonrevision.org. There are a variety of ways to be involved. We didn't get a chance to speak much, but I'll just throw it out there. 85 to 95% of our folks, depending on what season we're in, come from the justice arena. And so we do a lot of work with TJJD and TDC and other justice-related entities. So mentoring is a possibility. Letter writing to those that are at Youth Village or incarcerated is a possibility. To have connection to people that way, there's just purpose and hope given to them. There are opportunities to give, not just in the sense of to the operating budget, but there are real needs. We have a cleaning supply kit and we have a kitchen kit and we have, some basic needs as people get into their very first apartment that are opportunities. And we have live events with community night. We have a drop-in center. There are a host of ways to volunteer. You could be as involved as you want to be, but there's a contact information form to fill out and types of volunteer options that are available on our website.
Great,
All
wonderful.
right.
Well, thank you everyone so much. Passing it to you, Ashley.
Thank you. Thank you to all of our distinguished panelists. And I'm going to be introducing our keynote speaker, which is none other than Jerry L. Hawkins, the Executive Director of Dallas Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation, or DRHT. With a steadfast commitment to truth, racial healing, and transformation, Mr. Hawkins has been guiding a force in the fight against systemic injustice and inequity. Jerry is a visionary leader who has dedicated his life to the pursuit of justice and racial healing. His work with TRHT, a part of a national initiative by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, underscores his commitment to a narrative change, relationship building, and the implementation of equitable policies and practices. But Jerry's impact extends far beyond the boundaries of Dallas. He is a co-founder of the Imagining Freedom Institute, a national research-based leadership group that provides invaluable insights into the historical context of contemporary issues surrounding race, place, and space. With a rich background that includes roles such as project director at Backman Link Together, director of children's services at the Wilkinson Center, and currently as an adjunct professor at Texas Christian University, Jerry brings a wealth of experience and expertise to the table. His numerous accolades speak volumes about his unwavering dedication to community empowerment and social change. Please join me in welcoming Jerry L. Hawkins, a beacon of hope and inspiration in our collective journey towards a more equitable and just society.
Thank you, Ashley, for that great introduction. Thank you to Children at Risk, and thank you to Dr. Bob for your leadership. I am grateful to be here. Again, my name is Jerry Hawkins. I am the Executive Director of Dallas Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation. Again, I'm going to make this really brief. I am going to just share how we look at equity work in Texas, and particularly North Texas, through our work. But I'm going to just share also a few ways in which you or your community can engage in this work. So I am thankful to be here and really grateful for Children at Risk in the 2024 Equity Summit. You can go to the next slide. Again, this is my information. You can contact us at dallastrht.org or reach out to us at social media. We're pretty active on those spaces. So please reach out to us. We start everything we do with the next slide, which is called Land and People Acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the land that we are on in North Texas is land that was stewarded by Native American people, American Indian people, indigenous people for thousands of years before there was a city of Dallas, before there was a city of Fort Worth. And it's really important that we acknowledge that the Caddos, the Wichita, the Comanche, and many other indigenous groups. We have to continue to reach out to those communities. Dallas is one of the largest urban Indian resettlement sites in the country, and has like the fourth largest population of Indians in a major city in the country. We also acknowledge that North Texas, particularly Dallas and Fort Worth, were built by stolen labor. Were built by indigenous people from Africa who were enslaved in Texas and also built this land. And so we encourage people to start off work by acknowledging what has become before us, because it'll help with our work. Next slide. Dallas TRHT's mission is to create a radically inclusive city by addressing race and racism through narrative change, relationship building, and equitable policies and practices. Those last three things are the TRHT framework, which is on the next slide. And this is how we do our work. We start off with narrative change, which is the truth, what we call the ways in which we build the foundation for our work. We have to tell an overarching story about our community, but we also have to combat negative and disparate stereotypes about our community in these areas, including things like publishing, school curricula, and cultural institutions. Next is racial healing and relationship building. Because we live in segregated communities, it's really important for us to build strong relationships with each other, and we can do that through racial healing, which is bringing ourselves to wholeness. The three pillars at the bottom are what we call the transformation pillars, which starts with separation, which includes segregation, colonialization, and concentrated poverty, law, criminal, civil, and public policies, and then economy, structure, inequality, and barriers to opportunity. And those things are sequential. Once we encounter and deal with the decolonization, housing, we can move to building policies and then move to building an economy that works and is inclusive of everyone. Next slide. Our first TRHT guiding principle is that there must be an accurate recounting of history, both local and national. A lot of our nonprofits in our communities usually start off with data, and maybe census level data, and maybe even community level data. But the most important is actually knowing what happened in our communities. What it says is that a common prerequisite to an effective and enduring effort to achieve racial equity and healing is a full and accurate knowledge of the role racism has played in the abolition of communities. And our residents must be aware of this history in order to confront it and understand its relevance to contemporary community issues. Next slide. So I want to give you an example of that, and I'll use my own city, the city I live in, the city I raised my kids in, Dallas. Next slide. So again, we can start with some data. This is a report 2018 from Communities Foundation of Texas and CPPP, which is now Every Texan. And what they shared with us is that the racial and ethnic composition of Dallas County is changing. It says by 2050, Black and Hispanic residents of Dallas County are projected to make up 80% of Dallas. And all people of color would make up approximately 88% of the projected 3.3 million Dallas County residents. Next slide. So if you look at this chart, some people, without thinking about equity, will say, wow, that's a lot of people, right? They'll look at the numbers, right? I have a quantitative view of this chart. That's important, but really important is to have a qualitative view and think about what does it mean to have a population that is primarily brown and Black, right? Next slide. But there are reasons why we need to look deeper into this, right? D Magazine said Dallas was one of the most racist cities, if not the most racist city in America. In the 1920s, we had the largest Ku Klux Klan chapter in the United States per capita. 1 out of every 3 eligible men were part of this Klan, right? Next slide. Dallas had, at one point, the worst income inequality by neighborhood in the United States, according to the Urban Institute. Next slide. We also had, we ranked last in economic inclusivity when it comes to neighborhoods and economic mobility. Next slide. At one point, we also had the highest child poverty rate. And this is really important because I'm an educator. I have a degree in early childhood education. So this really hit me in the stomach, right? The highest child poverty rate among big cities. We've improved on this a bit, but it's still glaring to see in a headline, right? Next slide. And at one point, just about 6-7 years ago, Dallas ISD was one of the most segregated school districts in the country. And I want to read this quote in the next slide to you. What it says was, one important measure researchers use to gauge integration is minority exposure to white students, calculated based on an average of racial composition of individual campuses. If they use that measure, which they did 7-8 years ago, Dallas ISD ranked dead last, at least among the 50 largest urban school districts that have been on federal desegregation plans. So I'm just giving an example of, the context in which we're working in. And I am sure some of your cities and towns have similar contexts because we are in Texas or in other places in the country. Next slide. So just to give you an example, that education in Dallas has always been segregated by race. If you look at the next slide, when we started public education in Dallas formally, it started with 4 white schools and 2 Black schools. And there was policy on the state books and the city's books that said that these white children could not go to school with these Black children and vice versa, right? So it's really important to know this and where some of these inequities start. Next slide. I give you some more historical context, and this is a really important one. Brown versus Board passes in 1954, 1956, just 2 years after Brown versus Board, in Mansfield, which is south of Dallas and Fort Worth, something happens. Next slide. So these young people, high school age kids in the 1950s, pictured here, 2 years after Brown versus Board says that desegregation is the law of the land. They tried to enroll in the high school that is in their city, that is miles away, not less than miles away from their houses. Next slide. They are met, unfortunately, by a mob. In the next slide. You can see here, this is the first day of school in Mansfield ISD in 1956. What you see here on top of that school is an effigy. And that effigy on that pole as well, and there was a tree as well, is a representation of a Black person hanging or being lynched. A mob of 300 people formed and said that you will never, as a Black person, enter the halls of Mansfield ISD or you will be lynched. This was a huge issue. The Texas Rangers was called, as you can see in the left part of this picture. The governor of Texas obviously was called. Even the president of the United States was briefed on this. Why? Because it was federal law that schools are supposed to be desegregated, but a community decided that they will not integrate their schools. Next slide. You can see here in the next slide, the community mob that formed in some of the terrible racist images. As an educator, what I see are children, right? Children who are being fed these messages of hate and fed these messages of bigotry and racism. And those children are still here with us today, right? And so it's really important that we continue fighting for equity. Next slide. You can also see the images and messages that were scribbled on cars, right? Any Negro seen in Mansfield School today will be our next effigy, and says, we will allow no Negro to cross the line of great divide, right? Imagine being a Black young person, just want to go to school, and you meet this, right? What are you to do? What are you to do as a parent? These kids were forced to go to Fort Worth ISD segregated schools until the 1970s. All right. So it's a really important happening. People all over the country actually point out to this incident as a way that towns and cities in the South refused to desegregate, and it led to again more segregated schools until more federal cases happened in the 1970s. Next slide. So again, I want to share this with people, that public education in Dallas and in Texas was segregated by race from the beginning, and it remains today. There are some measures that say that school is more segregated than it was before Brown versus Board. So we have a lot of work to do, you all. Next slide. Why is historical analysis important? If you have or lack the wrong analysis, you will have the wrong solutions, right? It's really important as a foundation for all of us to start with narrative change, to gather the important qualitative data that we should have about our communities in order to do our work. Next slide. I also want to point out this, right? Our federal government Centers for Disease Control and Prevention put out a bulletin, and this is in 2019, saying that racism is a serious threat to the public's health, right? And it says that they are committed in their work to addressing racism as an obstacle to health equity. This was also doubled down, next slide, by the Academy of Pediatrics, which put out a policy brief that says the impact of racism on child and adolescent health is a crisis. Next slide. They also said, and this is really important, that racism is a core determinant of a child's health, and that if we are not seeing racism as a core social determinant of health, that is also a driver of health inequities, that we are missing a huge part of the work that we have to do. It says the impact of racism has been linked to birth disparities and mental health problems in children and adolescents, as the panel so eloquently shared in our previous session. So it's really important to look at this. I also want to say, next slide, that Dallas County has also declared that racism is a public health crisis. And doing so has become one of the largest areas in the country to do it. And this didn't only come from Dallas County commissioners, came from a lot of people over a long period of time, pushing the city of Dallas and Dallas County to recognize what has been happening for decades. Next slide. I also want to just share this too as a way to think about the historical analysis and the work that you all have to do. In our racial equity now cohorts, in the work that we do with community members and organizations, we share this roadmap to racial equity. And I want to share this with you all so we can really get what we call a framework to doing this work. It starts with problem awareness. And that is, do I understand what the problem is? And then root cause analysis. And do I understand where it comes from? Really, really hard. And I'm going to really be very frank. A lot of organizations spend time in problem awareness, but very little time in root cause analysis. All right. And then here's the big question that we have to ask ourselves. Do I care enough about the problem and the people it harms? It's a really important question for us to ask ourselves. And then lastly, strategy and sacrifice. Most of our efforts in nonprofits currently are here in strategy. Do I know how to correct a problem? But the last one is really important as well. Am I willing to do it? All right. Next slide. So it's really important for us, as I close, to think about these important principles. What we also have to do in our second guiding principle is to create a clear and compelling vision for equity, accompanied by a set of ambitious but achievable goals, both long-term and short-term. And we must assess our progress regularly. And community members must know what's happening, and they must have ways to enter the work. So I'm gonna give you a few examples of ways to do that. Next slide. Again, the first part of this work is create in your community and shape in your community a shared vision that includes all of us. Everyone has to see themselves in this shared vision, or there will be pushback. And I know that task is very difficult in the state in which we live, but we still have to do it. It's the work that we must do. Next slide. Everyone also has an immigration or migration story. In Dallas TRHT, we use the word immigration and migration in the same sentence because everyone in this country has one of these stories. Whether you're indigenous, whether you're descendant of enslaved Africans, if you are Latino, Latina, Latinx, you have one of these stories, and some of them are the same. It's really important that we dig into these stories and we share these stories to build our common humanity. Next slide. So it's really important for us to dismantle the hierarchy of human value everywhere. And what do we mean by dismantle the hierarchy of human value? As long as there's a racial hierarchy, a gender hierarchy, hierarchy when it comes to sexual preferences, when it comes to class, we will have disparities. We will have inequities. When we see these hierarchies, it is important for us to continue to dismantle them. And unfortunately for us, the hierarchy of race continues to be one of the most intractable issues. And so it is really important for us to continue to put our efforts into dismantling these hierarchies. Next slide. So for our community folks, people who are working at organizations that are serving community members, community leaders, however you identify, people have to see you fighting for them. And it's not just people who look like you. It is actually most important for solidarity. People who do not look like you have to see you fighting for them. They have to see you at City Hall talking about an issue that won't affect you, but will because you live in the same community, right? People have to see you fighting for them if you're a man and their gender issues, right? Obviously, Roe v. Wade is a real big issue. Roe v. was actually decided in a courtroom in Dallas, Texas, right? So it's a very local issue. But people have to see you fighting for them. It's really important. You have to show up for other people, other communities. Next slide. It's really also important that you, and I mean everybody here, you are both part of history and you are also making history, right? What is your contribution to your local community? What is your contribution to your city, your town? We have to think of ourselves as part of that history and making history because our work is important and it makes us take it very seriously, but it also brings moments of joy. And next slide. We also, and this is one of the hardest things that we have to do to end this conversation, we have to work across lines of difference to build power. I want to tell you this story and then I'll end with this story. Next slide. So what you'll see here is me talking to the, at the time, the most conservative city council woman in our city at the time. Her name was Jennifer Staubach Gates. And yes, that is Roger Staubach's daughter, if there's any Cowboys fans. She voted about issues that I vehemently disagreed, including she voted against removing Confederate monuments from our city. But next slide, I talked to her staff, and what you learn is city staff are really important. And her city staff invited us to talk to the city council's retreat. And we got to, next slide, bring some of our community partners with us, and I do that sometimes without permission. This is American Indian Heritage Day, organization who created the first holiday in Texas for American Indians. They told me that they had never talked to city staff before, and so I brought them along with me, and they got to talk to them. Next slide. I also continued to talk to Jennifer Staubach Gates. We didn't agree on a lot of things, but what we did agree on is that racial healing is really important in our communities. Next slide. What Jennifer Staubach Gates did do is create a space where the city can recognize the work of Dallas TRHT, and she wrote a resolution declaring a day in January, the National Day of Racial Healing for the city of Dallas, and she came and presented it in front of a crowd of justice-seeking folks. It was very brave of her, but we found a commonality, and it's really important. And I think that we, as people who want better for our communities, have to do the hard work of reaching out to people who don't agree with us. Next slide. So I'll end with there. I want to know if there's any questions. I will check the Q&A. I don't know if those questions are for me or not, but thank you all for having me, and I really appreciate the work of Children at Risk. And
Thank you so much for that, Jerry. That was very eye-opening and very thought-provoking. And so I'm going to have the pleasure in introducing our next panel of experts. This session title is Navigating the Equity Landscape, How Organizations Are Pioneering Change. In this enlightening session, you can expect to hear from our privilege from hearing from our experts and representing diverse organizations who are at the forefront of driving meaningful change in the equity space. This panel promises to be a dynamic exchange of ideas, initiatives, and enriching conversation. We have our esteemed moderator for today's discussion, Oscar George. We also have panelists, Dr. Megan Green, we have Kevin A. Hall, and Michelle D. Harper, as well as Elvira. And so without further ado, panelists, if you haven't already, please join us. And let's drive and delve into this illuminating discussion and explore how these leaders can pave the way towards a more inclusive and just society.
Asha, I believe you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I sounded excellent, but that's okay. But I just wanted to say thank you, Ashley. As Ashley mentioned, I'm Asha George. I am a board member here at Children at Risk and adore spending my time with them and seeing the progress they make and getting to celebrate every day with them and all the work that they do. I'm excited here to be here with our esteemed guest. We're going to spend some time learning about how organizations are pioneering change for equity on the ground every day. And so we're going to kick it off first with Dr. Green. As I was looking at your introduction, Ashley mentioned your background in ratio-linguistic justice. That term really kind of shined on me. I was like, I need to know what that means. So can you tell us a little bit about what is ratio-linguistic justice?
Sure. Thank you, Asha. I actually want to first start by saying that the universe makes connections where connections need to be made. So I'm actually from South Louisiana and actually moved from Dallas, Fort Worth to the Chicago area. And so I noticed that Jerry Hawkins, our keynote speaker, who every message resonated so loudly today, noticing that we made a slight switch. So with Mr. Hawkins being from the Chicago area, and having ties to Illinois. So as I think about this concept of racial-linguistic justice, we're really thinking about the intersections of racial equity and linguistic equity, right? So thinking about how very monolingual dominant narratives have really subverts the language practices of racialized communities. And so in my work as an early childhood teacher educator, preparing educators to not just focus on one or two intersections of identity when they're working with young children and families, but thinking about racial and ethnic identities, thinking about the multilingual histories that children and families are bringing into spaces. And so that is really the focus of racial linguistic justice. How are we looking at systems of oppression across those intersections?
I love that because it really talks about, some of the diversity that we all have. Some of it you see, and some of it you don't see. And I love, the lines of that, especially as I think about the fact that English was not my first language, and so I appreciate that. Tell us a little bit about the early education settings. Are there specific practices or interventions that support linguistic diversity and foster inclusion?
Great. So I really appreciate the fact that we started off today's Equity Summit with a few data points. You'll notice that within those data points, when we talk about multilingualism, a lot of times we are focusing on what folks have historically called English language learners. But I think the racial-linguistic aspect is really thinking about what are all the language practices that young children are bringing into a space. So for my work in particular, I think about how young children who are African American English speakers, how are those language practices really valued in early childhood spaces? How are we disrupting specifically the anti-Black violence that we know is engaged with young children? Looking at their language practices through a deficit perspective, thinking that we need to shape them into mainstream American English dialects rather than really building on the linguistic diversity and the funds of knowledge that children are bringing in with them. So when thinking about what are the practices that we can really employ in early learning spaces, the first thing is really to disrupt that, what Dr. Baker Bell calls the linguistic racism, right? That occurs when we don't value the language practices that children enter our early learning settings with, and that we don't value the language practices that are already at home.
Yeah, I love that because so much of our culture shows up in the way we communicate with each other, right? And so people should be able to bring all of it to them, all of it with them as they show up every day. So let's open it up to the panel. I'd love to get a few of you to share a few experiences of really successful collaborations with communities and how that has positively impacted, the equity landscape. I'll open it up to any of you guys if you want to share.
So I would gladly kick us off and share space for my fellow panelists to bring their perspectives in. So one of the things that we do inside of Evident Change is work with jurisdictions in the juvenile justice, child welfare space to really think about systems work, right? And so how do we impact systems that impact lives? And doing the work on who are the lives that we're talking about? And how do we do that work by including community voices in that? Like we get really jargony now and we toss these words out And we want community involvement. We want lived experience. And what does that really mean to that particular community? And not really doing that cookie cutter approach. And so inside of Evident Change, we partner with communities. We partner with those who are working with our most vulnerable citizens to evaluate. I like to be a critical lover of systems and organizations and think about how these systems are preventing folks from living their very best lives. And then how do we disrupt and dismantle those systems so that the access to those resources are without barriers and limits. So I think about some of the work that we've done in Texas, primarily with Harris County specifically, really challenging to think about the justice system and the impacts that it's having. And now out of that work, they've created their own ARC team. The beginning stages of, in a very tough state, right? The beginning stages of creating a framework that allows them to look at the systems and how they intersect. I really love how Dr. Green brought up that intersectionality. It's so critical, right? I think about race as a part of everything and all of nothing. We have to think about all of the intersections and the impacts. And so in Evident Change, that's our mission, that's our commitment to really partnering with communities and understanding what we mean when we say communities and how do we get organizations inside of those communities to come together collectively to do some work.
I love that, Michelle. Thank you for sharing. It's just so powerful when we take a very strong role in driving change, right? And when we come together collectively, how powerful does that show up from an impact perspective versus one person trying to drive every day? So love that. Anyone else want to share?
I can go ahead and share. This makes me think even of the work that's being done in Houston with our organization and the Familias or Families program, and how even from the design side of that program, it was thinking about how are we going to elevate the voices of what families in that community are asking for and what they need. And so there was intentional consideration about having a framework for the program that's research-based and looking outward at who's doing that work well, and then also creating room for personalization that is driven by the families that are participating in that program. And I highlight that as an example of collaboration because it wasn't just work done by our organization. It was bringing in community-based organizations and partners that do other work really well that could help fill gaps that were being lifted, such as providing interpretation services for families that needed it, providing childcare services, removing any barriers that could be presented for our families with being able to participate in their evenings in this program. And then on the curriculum side, the families, again, upvoting and coming together to build community and also let us know how we can help lift their voice in their school communities and district. And that collaboration, again, required community-based partners, school districts, and also funding partners that valued this work and want to empower families that made this possible to do. So that's one example that I think of and has been such a positively received by the families, and that work is expanding now to other regions because of how it's being received and unexpected outcomes that are coming from that work in terms of there's the things that we intended for out of that program, and then just some beautiful offshoots that are happening when you have families that share a love for their children and being able to understand systems that weren't made for them. And when there's that solidarity of them coming together, that it's just magical in what they're able to come around once the program's over and the change they're driving on their own. And now they have access to resources of now they have a network that they can lean on to support. And as an organization, when we don't have a solution, it is looking outwardly at asking our community, asking people that we know, asking others that we don't know about there's a need, who can rise up to fill it.
I love that, because you know what you're really, kind of sharing is there's always a lot of times where we tend to just assume what people need. And what you're talking about is really spending the time up front, recognizing and listening on both sides of the fence, right? You've got one where the families are listening and learning on how to operate within a system. And then from an organizational perspective, y'all are learning very closely to, what these really, really need. And I feel like that is very pivotal in some of the offshoot wins that you don't even expect in that, because you're getting to the hone of what is pivotal for the big change to happen. And so I love that you shared that. As we think, about that, like examples of some successful programs and policies that have helped kind of tackle disparities across, when you think about health, justice, education, the basic needs. What are the lessons that you've drawn from on those initiatives? Did I catch you, Michelle? I think she went frozen. Michelle, are you there? Uh-oh, we lost her on mute.
Yeah, so system is doing the system thing over here.
Do you want me to repeat the question, or did
Technology,
you?
please. No, yeah, please.
Yeah, so I was curious, on the ground, can you share some examples of really successful programs and policies that you've used to really effectively tackle these disparities when you think about health, justice, education, the basic needs? Like, what are the lessons that you've drawn that we can learn from today?
Right. So Jerry did a really good job teeing this question up for me, right? When talking about health. And I think about social determinant of health programs that are happening, that are really looking at what are the underlying issues, and working with partners across these areas that you mentioned, Asha, and really paying attention to understanding what food insecurities and the ways that they impact health, how this wealth gap in this country is impacting how folks can access resources. So the work that social determinant of health is doing is really, again, looking at that intersection, and they're finding a lot of positive results, right? Like really this data-driven way of thinking about this has really been one of the programs that I've found to be really successful, because they are expanding their reach, and they're expanding the conversation and expanding the participants that are at the table and really getting into the community. Unfortunately, COVID created, right, like an avenue to have this conversation differently, and really understanding the impact of being in the actual community, not talking about pulling folks out and bringing them to a table and asking them to speak for the masses, really getting into the community, right? And so social determinant of health programs got into the community and learned about where there were gaps and what was causing the inequities, and then went back to create some policies and programs and some tools that organizations could use, utilizing assessments, right? Every time a policy is written, using an equity assessment to determine its impact before the policy hit the desk of those who would have to implement that policy. And really leveraging the importance of that common language, that shared understanding of the work that has to be done. And part of that, right, like it starts with training. That education piece is the entry. How are we having these conversations where we're talking apples to apples? And then you have to build your capacity to get to what the sustainability inside of organizations look like. And I really do love and respect some of the tools that they've utilized to be able to help organizations do that. So they're giving them the resources and then stepping back and being a partner that will lean in when needed, and not trying to always drive what the outcomes look like. There's a lot of benefit in that. Community is where the change is going to happen. It's not going to be with policymakers. It's not going to be with the leaders and the mayors of those communities. It's going to be really back to that grassroots level. And I really love the way Kevin is nodding and smiling, right? I really want to invite that thought in, Kevin, because it's critical. If we're going to make this change, if we're really going to impact our vulnerable children, it's going to require a bigger community voice and the power of that, right? Ensuring that they have the tools and the resources, not just my voice that doesn't count, but really empowering and giving the resources to that community to address their needs.
You know, and I really love the, you know, the organic nature of moving people from that, getting educated and building awareness to garnering the buy-in because it's real and experienced and they're every day and they're being able to collectively bring that forward. And then creating the change at an adoption level that can be most impactful, right? That is, it was an incredible example of watching that live. I mean, that's what we want to see in every change, right? And so I love that. You mentioned the pandemic. You know, I was thinking about, you know, I work in the technology company industry for more than 15 years of my career. And so, you know, I saw during the pandemic how big a role technology played in society during that time. And so I was thinking of Elvira, as we're talking through this, you know, in your role, how did technology kind of empower our Latino communities in the realm of education? How do you ensure that like these technology solutions are culturally relevant and accessible for these communities?
I think, you know, that's one of the things that we really saw through the pandemic is if you had the information and the access, then you were able to leverage it and access learning supports and things that you needed to help. Some of the things that you're still seeing today, even as people are trying to support their kids are wanting to support themselves. I have a high school student and a middle school student, and both of them, I see how different their education is compared to, you know, just 20 years ago, gosh, 10 years ago, that when they don't know something, they, you know, they can easily, even the thought process of, let me check my math work by just asking Alexa, did I, you know, do this right? And then it's so intuitive for them to just kind of make that question. At the same time, when I see those beautiful things where they're finding ways to leverage the tech to help them in what they're trying to accomplish, there's also this gap where you see, what about families or individuals that don't have that technology or access to? And it reminds me of my upbringing where we, you know, I remember quarters and going to find that payphone to be able to make a call. And so I always think about how, yes, technology can empower students in their learning, but at the same time, in order to do that, then we have to consider the access, the affordability, and then also how we're helping people adopt and use the tools. So those three things are so important in being able to bridge the digital, you know, equity gap that exists, and so important now because how fast technology changes. And I think in order to do that, we have to be able to share freely. We have to challenge systems that are not working for us. For that culturally relevant technology, we need to diversify who is out there developing these tech products and be able to invite different voices into that conversation. And I think each person can do this on their own too, by just really being conscious of being curious about what we don't know, reflecting inward, and examining, almost like checking yourself of what do I not know and how can I look outward to fill that gap. And that requires, I think, us to share freely, connect one another, and know what we don't know so that we can seek out new knowledge. And when you have it, share it freely.
Yeah. You know, it's so funny because I think about even my teenage boy. I swear he's like my tech support, right? Like for the day-to-day, I mean, stuff. This next generation is so digitally savvy and so, I mean, so much smarter than I was, at least at that age, right? And so the access you shared, having access to having those equitable opportunities to be able to take things forward and create opportunity, that is so, so important. Okay, Kevin, you've been quiet. I feel like you're oozing with wisdom here, and you're going to really, you know, spotlight us big here. You know, I looked at your profile. I saw that you do a lot of community outreach. So I'd love your perspective. How does the city of Dallas collaborate with local organizations, community partners to really navigate and address the broader systemic issues when we talk about health disparities?
Thank you for the question, and I apologize for being quiet. I just been enamored with the wealth of knowledge I've been given, so I just try to be as fun sometimes. But within the city of Dallas, and thank you for the lead-in with the digital component that we discussed before. One of the things that I prioritize into coming into the WIC program with the city of Dallas was the digital strategy. You have to meet people where they're at. And in the communities that we are targeting specifically with awareness, participation, and outreach, the southern sector of Dallas, which I am responsible for, the southern corridor, we have a lot of health disparities simply because people cannot access them. And one of the ways that they're not able to access them was digital strategies. And when Ms. Harper mentioned the pandemic, that was one of the major flaws that we found in barriers to care just across the healthcare industry in the city of Dallas, going to be affected area that a lot of people couldn't make appointments because they couldn't get there, and they couldn't do telehealth because they didn't have the internet access to the Wi-Fi. And so what we're doing here at the WIC program is overhauling that digital strategy by partnering with local organizations and international organizations such as mobile service providers, working with the city to get internet access so people can make appointments. We're doing a lot of digital outreach with promoting outreach events through social media because that's where a lot of people's focus is. We do text blasts with a lot of the appointments that we make for our patients. We follow up with them through text message, through email. We keep them abreast of what is going on within the community through social media. And as far as partnering with our local organizations, there's a child poverty activity lab, which is a huge resource for us, and finding solutions to optimize our outreach. I know one of the grants, which I am responsible for, came through the USDA, which is the Community Innovation and Outreach grant. And that particular grant is totally around just increasing the awareness of the WIC program. I'm not sure if people are aware that from the age of birth, from birth to the age of 5, that it is some of the most critical times for our kids in terms of nutrition and just basic needs access, because it really determines the outcome of the rest of their life and their development. And so the WIC program is extremely important and imperative in that. And like I said, we partnered with CPAL, Child Poverty Activity Lab. We also do economic mobility. So we partnered with the International Rescue Committee, as well as the Financial Empowerment Group, to provide basic services such as financial education, partnering with employers for people to improve their income, and then also tax preparation services, because it is that time of year. We partner with these organizations to get that cost. And also just bringing the data, which is what I'm also responsible for, bringing that to the city of Dallas. I know with working in our communities, they don't come down there all the time. Speaking of the legislators and the politicians and the representatives, they're not there to see the day-to-day stuff. And so we not only bring that data to them to show them what the increase is, what the needs are, but to show them the faces. So we do a lot of photography and videography, just real-time interaction with our community participants, just so that they can see exactly what it is that we're doing, the timing and the full effort that we're doing.
You know what I love about your what you share, Kevin, is some of us want to influence change a lot, and it's so sometimes hard and slow when we try to go to the big entities. But what you're really talking about is it's all within the ecosystem of individuals everywhere. I mean, we all have employers who have powerful positions when it comes to the currency and credibility in the lines of business they do. Right. We have in your talk about we all have access to be able to, send letters, and you're leveraging data to have conversation with legislators that, where they may not always experience it in the day-to-day, they're getting real data that, what gets measured gets done. That's kind of what happens, right? And you're kind of bringing that forward in light of a broader context with those experiences. And so there's so much power in all of that each of us have, even within our reach, and not everybody has that. And so what you're really kind of shining the light on is the opportunity we have as a society here in our everyday to take a more active role to support these organizations. So love that. Thank you for sharing. Michelle, as you think about partnership collaborations, have you seen things happen effectively from different sectors addressing disparities comprehensively? Just curious about like the elements that you see that contribute to success when we see collaborations.
Right, like so frameworks like collective impact would be one that you can pick up and put in any community, right? And they build their pillars around these 5 ways of thinking about a shared agenda, right? These individuals are doing some great work in communities, but that collaborative effort is the thing that's going to be able to move the needle. How do we share resources, right? And so collective impact is really thinking about how to do that across these spaces. It's going to have the biggest impact inside of those communities, and how are we using data to really keep us accountable to what it is that we are trying to measure, and how do we leverage the leaders inside of those entities to bring their pieces to the table, right, to be able to make the kind of impact. Somebody is holding the really large purse string, right, that really is going to have some of the impact that we want. And so collective impact is one of those entities that are building frameworks that, again, can be utilized in any community that gets those communities thinking about how we have a collaborative impact, right? Like the greater good. How do we take our individual contributions and really look at how do we impact our vulnerable children and these families that are really committed to change? So I really recommend one of those, that as a framework for folks to start thinking about how do we bring our individual pieces to have this collective impact.
Love it, love it, love it. We're right at time. Ashley's here to give me the cue, which means we got to close down shop. But I just want to take a moment and say thank you guys for sharing. I myself have learned so much from all of you, and I know the audience appreciates you sharing your learnings and experience. With that, I'll hand it over to Ashley.
Thank you all. Thank you for that enriching discussion. And with our, oh yes, we have our survey prompt. Please help us inform future learning events and participate in the survey. And now I'm going to be introducing our last and final session. I am so excited to bring on board. We have some emerging leaders and some experts, some scholarly experts who are going to share some academic pieces and paving our way for inclusivity in the future. I welcome Bethany Edwards, Dr. Bethany Edwards. She was a doctoral student at Southern Methodist University, and Peter Libreros. He is a bilingual interventionist in Title I campus in Cy-Fair Independent School District. So please, you all, take it away. We can go to the next slide.
All right, this is me. Hello, everyone. Good morning or afternoon. As mentioned, I'm Dr. Bethany Edwards. I'm currently serving as the director of the Early Learning Alliance in Tarrant County, Texas. But today I'm presenting on research I conducted for my doctoral dissertation last year. So the title of my project was Racial Ethnic Disproportionality in Special Education in an Urban Texas School District. And by disproportionality, what I mean is the extent to which membership in a given race or ethnicity affects the probability of receiving special education services. So people tend to think of overrepresentation when they think of disproportionality. That's typically kind of what's in the headlines, which means that there's a greater percentage of students of color who receive special education services than there is in the general population of students. However, I believe that underrepresentation is also a problem. It's also an equity issue because it could indicate that students of color are not receiving the services that they need and that they're entitled to, or that they're receiving services under a more stigmatizing category. So for my project, I utilized student level data from 7 years from one of the largest school districts in Texas. The district was primarily Hispanic and economically disadvantaged, and I investigated 3 primary research questions. I think my research questions are on the next slide. So if we can advance to the next slide. So that there we go. My 3 research questions, the first, to what extent were Hispanic and Black students under or overrepresented in special education in the district? Second, did the likelihood of special education service receipt for Hispanic and Black students differ across campuses within the district? And 3, how did the likelihood of special education service receipt for Hispanic and Black students change over time between those 7 years, starting in the 2015-2016 school year and going through the 2021-2022 school year? So the 2 figures shown here, figure 1 and figure 2, really get at that third research question. Figure 1, right below the research questions, compares the predicted probability of special education service receipt for Hispanic students as compared to non-Hispanic students. And so as you can see, the predicted probability for all students, regardless of their ethnicity, did increase over time. That really has more to do with the historic extreme underrepresentation of all students in special education in the district as a result of kind of the historic legal capping of special education funding. But what I want us to look at today is really that gap between the Hispanic and non-Hispanic students. So as you can see, each year Hispanic students were underrepresented in special education in the district. That gap did narrow a little bit over time, but it did remain statistically significant for all 7 years during the study period. So if you look over to figure 2, this is kind of the same type of comparison between students who were Black and students who were not Black. For each school year, Black students were overrepresented compared to all other students, meaning they were more likely to receive special education services. That gap did narrow slightly over time, although once again, remained significant. And I also wanted to point out that these results all control for student gender, economic disadvantage, native language, school, which school campus they were at, and cohort, which was a composite between grade level and year. So I think, is there one more slide for mine? Yeah, so just don't worry about reading all of that. I'll just say that this is it's very hard to distill this 3-year project, 200-page report into a couple-minute presentation for y'all today. But I'll end by giving a couple of policy recommendations that I made coming out of my project. The first was for the state of Texas to reevaluate the threshold that they consider legally disproportionate. So currently, a particular race or ethnicity must be 2.5 times more likely than other races and ethnicities within a school district before the state kind of considers that a problem and steps in. And there's also currently no guidelines around underrepresentation of students, despite my results here indicating that in this district, Hispanic students may not be receiving the services that they are entitled to in the education system. And lastly, I really want to encourage researchers, educators, and policymakers alike to spend at least equal time, energy, and funding as they do on kind of researching and proving the inequities that exist, spending that same amount of time and energy and funding on reducing the inequities that exist in children's lives before they enter the school system. And a perfect example of that is the inequitable access to quality early learning experiences that we know set the stage for children learning for the rest of their lives. So I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Peter Liberos, and I am a doctoral candidate, just defended actually a couple of weeks ago. And I'm in the doctoral program in the ethical leadership program. And so at the University of St. Thomas. And the specific topic that I have is elementary public schools' role in providing Hispanic American immigrant parents with equitable access to parental engagement and agency. And so through my study, I was able to, the demographic that I had was the greater Houston area, not specifically the district I work with. It was from districts all over our Houston community. And what we see in the Houston community is that our Hispanic immigrant population continues to increase. It is the largest in the state and in our city. And so what my study was focused on was the experience that our Hispanic American immigrant parents and families have had with our public school system, specifically with our elementary schools, because what we have learned is that the foundation starts in elementary, right? Of course, we know middle school and high school are important, but if we're able to capture our parents and engage them very early on, that will see benefits thereafter. I was able to use a social capital theory with this study because we then are able to see our parents, our families able to receive the social capital that they need: emotional support, instrumental support, appraisal support, and informational support. And so according to Tardy 1986, these supports help then elevate and provide some type of leverage in order for our parents to be able to engage with the public school system with their children's education. And so the central research question I had was, what is the Hispanic American immigrant parents' engagement experience with the American public school system? And so I had 3 research questions that were aligned to that. The first one was, what are immigrant Hispanic American parents' perception of the access to social capital supports provided by their elementary school for their children or family? Second research question was, what are immigrant Hispanic American parents' perception of how and why they become involved in their children's education? And the third research question was, what are immigrant Hispanic American parents' perception of their agency and engagement in their children's education? My study was a qualitative study, so I was able to interview approximately 10 parents in our community. And those questions led me then to the following themes. For research question 1, the first theme I had was lack of awareness of social capital availability. We were able to see that the majority of our parents did not know that our schools had connections or had resources available or tools available other than maybe the education provided. The second thing was lack of engagement from schools. They felt that schools were not engaging with them, a lot of times they used words like, we feel that our voices don't matter in the public school system. And the third theme is a lack of acceptance, right? As Hispanics, they felt discriminated against because some of them said that they didn't have the legal documents to be in this country, or simply because they didn't speak the English language, or they looked different. The second research question led us to 2 things. The first one being a base level involvement. Our Hispanic American immigrant parents are involved, but it's that base level involvement because they don't have that social capital, they don't have that information, they don't have the availability, right, the access to continue growing that engagement. The second theme was they want a better future for their children. 10 out of 10 parents stated that they wanted a better education for their student, a better future for their student, and they knew and they mentioned that education was the key for that. For the third research question, The theme that we see is language and cultural barriers to advocate. They were able to state that they felt that they didn't have the language or the prior knowledge of how to even advocate in case of their child was going through something, or they wanted to advocate educationally or emotionally for their child. Second, a lack of cultural awareness from schools. They felt that schools, they use a lot of times, the word that they used was human, right? They felt that the schools did not see them as equal, or their own children as human, and so that was a theme that we had as well. The third theme that came across was a need for effective communication, right? A lot of times they felt that communication is given. Yes, they're sending out flyers and everything, but how effectively is this reaching our Hispanic American immigrant population, right? Are we just checking boxes? And the fourth theme is parent workshops in their native language. They felt that if they're able to go inside the campuses and hear from teachers, from the administrators, that would build trust. And having some sort of workshops where they can receive information needed to help them, help their students, it would be of great benefit. So the first conclusion was public elementary schools' lack of embracing Hispanic American immigrant parents and their schools community. The second conclusion was the public elementary schools' lack of providing social capital to Hispanic American immigrant families to help break down their barriers and provide equitable opportunity for engagement. The first implication is by not rethinking how we currently do parental engagement, Hispanic American immigrant parents will continue to feel discouraged to engage with the public schools. And the last implication, by not providing Hispanic American immigrant families with the necessary social capital, these families do not get the same access opportunities that they need to be able to succeed in the American public schools system and our American economy.
Thank you so much, both of you, for that enriching information. And so briefly, with the time that we have, I would like to ask both of you, we'll have time for one question. So if you could briefly share, from your perspective, what role does data and research play in identifying and addressing disparities, and how can communities leverage this information to advocate for change?
Well, I can jump right in. I think my answer to this is probably much longer than time allows right now. But basically, I think that research plays a huge role in fostering an equitable and just society, and not just by illuminating the realities that currently exist, but also in actively pushing back against inequitable and if we just call it out, racist systems, including the public education system. So if I can explain what I mean, in my dissertation, I employed what is known as a critical quantitative methodology. So a lot of people think of having a critical lens in work is only possible in qualitative work, but this methodology, it's also known as quant crit, really rejects the notion that the role of quantitative research has to be completely neutral. So when I began to learn about quant crit, it kind of blew my mind because it was contrary to everything that I had previously been taught about quantitative research, and that the researcher is kind of a blank slate without any kind of purpose other than just showing what it was true in the world. They have no role in contributing to how their research is interpreted or implemented. But what QuantCrit asserts is that numbers themselves are not neutral, despite what we tell ourselves. And therefore, researchers who are committed to equity also have the responsibility to make methodological decisions in their research that will promote equity. So in my study, I instead of doing what a lot of disproportionality research does, which is comparing students of color or Black students or Hispanic students to white students, the QuantCrit methodology really asserts that is intentionally or not kind of placing white students as this group either to compare to or to attain to be. And so in my research, I compared each racial group to all other groups who weren't in the study group, just trying to help through just the way that we're presenting research to reframe some of these notions around children of color through like a deficit framework, right? And so I think that's one way that as researchers we can make methodological decisions that really push equity forward.
Thank you for that. And if Peter, if you could briefly share with us the imperative role.
Absolutely. So when we look at our Hispanic American immigrant parents, right? The majority of them only speak Spanish, and being able to hear their voices and listen to them and getting that qualitative data was so eye-opening, and being able to bring that forth makes a huge change. And so I think listening to all communities, all of our marginalized communities, all these communities are underserved, and giving them that space and that importance to be able to share their thoughts, because what we're able to find out is that our this population was able to see parental engagement very different than how we see it in our American public school systems. And so valuing their input and what they bring into our schools is important, but also elevating it and being able to provide these resources. Then, because we know this information, right, we're able to then provide the needed resources and tools that they need. I feel that a lot of times at schools we do provide the resources and we make it known, but I feel like it's a lot of checklist, right? It's not the actual work of getting it done, but it's just like, oh yes, we've done it. It's the actual imparting of that information. And so through my research, I was able to see the importance of hearing them out and allowing their voices to be heard. And I love organizations like Latinos for Education. I know Elvira is part of it, that elevate these voices and give them a space as well to participate. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for that. And so I'll be providing closing remarks. I'm so grateful for all of our experts and panelists, for all of those who contribute to this transformative event, and our esteemed speakers. Thank you for sharing your expertise and insights and your passions in this work, and the valuable time and effort into shaping this dialogue and inspiring action. And to our dedicated audience members, thank you for your engagement. Thank you for your curiosity and your commitment, and creating a more just and equitable space. Your presence and your participation have made this summit a resounding success. And as we depart from this gathering, I want us to carry forward the lessons learned, the connections that we made, and the dialogue that took place as we continue to champion equity in all aspects of our lives. I want to thank you to our sponsor, HEB, and I want to thank you to our partners, Early Learning Alliance, United Way of Tarrant County, M-Schools, IDRA, and they will be on the materials for tomorrow. And last but not least, Evident Change. Feedback on these events is again, it's so crucial to the work that we do and moving forward as we shape future learning events. Please be on the lookout for a follow-up email, including the slide decks and the recording, as well as information regarding our next major event surrounding equity, which is going to be our equity tour, kicking off March 25th. It'll be the 25th through the 28th. We will be visiting Austin, El Paso, Dallas, and lastly, on the 28th, we'll be visiting Houston. More work is to be done, and so we'll be in communication. And with that, I wish everyone an excellent and wonderful day, and may equity continue for children.